My books over the years, been analyzed, and they're deeper reads.
Hmm.
And I've been told by readers that I tend to get philosophical in the third act,
Nice.
which I didn't really see that until more recent years. My series, The Tales of Tartarus, that been over now for the last couple of years, I initially sat down and wrote that series, and I'm like, oh, this is a really cool series about immortals and demons and all kinds of stuff like that. Oh, horror series, supernatural, because I love all that stuff.
Sure.
Being away from that has really taught me a lot about the books, because
Interesting.
I found that time away from the work, it gives you a chance to pause and reflect and say, ooh, what is this story really about? I grew up in southern New Jersey, not far from Philadelphia, and I went to school in Philadelphia at Widener University, which on my book tour that was taking place this past year, I actually went live at Widener, which because I was doing some setting and scene explorations for my most recent release, The Mortician, and part of that took place at that particular campus, which is just south of Center City, Philadelphia. I'm going to show you a few places here on the Widener campus. This path here, this brick path, actually runs in a courtyard of the campus. Okay. Widener University started out as Pennsylvania Military College before it became Widener University, and the name Widener actually is associated with the sinking of the Titanic. So if you do a little research on the sinking of the Titanic, the Wideners, it's all related. They were, some of the first class passengers on that ship. So I grew up in that area, and I, started my life with a practical career and went into hospitality for a while. But I got into creative writing at a young age. Back when I was in high school, I took some creative writing courses. I took popular reading and study of fiction. So I just did it because they were English electives when I was going to high school. But I didn't know back then that I was actually preparing myself for authorship in the future.
What did your parents do for a living? Were they involved in any kind of art form at all?
No, they weren't, actually. My father was a very practical career in business, and my parents are both retired now, and they've been retired actually since I was a serious author, since I've been published. And my mother was in the service for the government, working in the state government in New Jersey. So I was where the art started. However, my family has always been very supportive of the arts and writing. I do come from a family of writers and editors and photographers. So it's art has been a big part of my life since I was a child. It's been a big influence in my life.
So speaking of influences, who was the most influential person in your life that helped you realize your writer's journey?
I would have to say, we're going to have to fast forward a little bit here, probably to about 2006, 2007. And I had a writing instructor because a a very important person in my life convinced me. This is after I finished Ashes, because Ashes was finished in early 2007. And I was convinced to go to a creative writing class. Like, oh, well, go to this class. And so I signed up for it. It was something at night. I was already well into my career, my hospitality career at that point. But I knew I had this novel written. And I was like, oh, I have to do something with this novel. I can't just not see this through. And so I go into this class, and it's probably maybe 15 or 20 other people. Everyone's kind of saying, oh, I want to learn how to write. I want to be a writer. And the instructor looks at me, and I show up to class with this. And I'm going to pick this up. I'm going to show it to you. Okay. See this? This is what I showed up with. This is the first printing of Ashes. I printed this out in early 2007, just after I finished the novel. I walked into class like this. And as she's getting ready to open up the class, she comes up to my desk, looks down at me and says, looks like you have a manuscript here. And that's kind of, where she took me under her wing as the instructor. And I would always bring in, little snippets of what I'd written, because I was already writing The Quest for Immortality at this point, which was my follow-up novel. She said, oh, you have a really, natural gift for this. And she really encouraged me. But the number one thing that she taught me, which has stuck with me, was she taught me the whole principle of show versus tell. And that really revolutionized everything for me. I mean, that was the key. I had the raw talent of storytelling since I was in high school, even in college. And then I didn't really, but you have to cultivate that. You have to develop it. You have to polish it and get it to the point where, I'm not just going to tell the reader that, a character A flicked their cigarette into the grass. I'm going to show them the plume of smoke rising from the blades, and then you see their foot stamping out the butt. And there was a huge difference, and my writing really it grew like in leaps and bounds after that experience.
Did you actually carry the binder in there? Or
every single class. I took it with me every time. And while we never actually opened it up and read from it, because she always had her instruction, her plan for the course and everything. Some of my writing did get read in that class, which was nice, but nothing actually specifically from Ashes.
Yeah, the binder thing reeks of hospitality, like from your days.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a lot of my upbringing and stuff like that. Because when I graduated, well, actually, no, excuse me, rewind a little bit, few more years. When I graduated high school and was applying to colleges, I applied to Widener in Philadelphia, and I saw that hospitality sounded interesting to me. I have a knack for catering and everything, so I enjoy it. It gets in your blood, and with catering, it's like if you get away from it for a few years, you miss it. And I just had something like that. So, let me go into that. I became a banquet manager for years, enjoyed it, worked like round the clock, but somehow managed to write Ashes. Somehow managed to find the time to do it. So, but that's one of the reasons why it took me so long to write the book. I started Ashes in 2002, finished it in 2007, and it was published in 2012.
So often you hear it's almost become a cliche that I was writing before I could talk. It sounds like to me that you really didn't start thinking about storytelling till you were in high school. Is that right?
Well, that is true. But you see, a lot had to do with my first job, because I was always an avid reader and movie watcher from when I grew up. I remember watching all the Nightmare on Elm Streets and all the Halloweens and all those movies, all the Poltergeist movies. I mean, I literally was feeding myself all these horror films mostly. That's what I loved the most. But then with my first job, which was, I was in high school, and I worked for a state forest park in southern New Jersey as a toll collector. Now, it's not the type of toll collector you would think with a whole bunch of cars coming through. I mean, literally, it was like maybe 2 or 3 cars a day, all day long. I'm sitting in this little toll booth, with my little picnic lunch and books.
Mm.
And during that time, I read Stephen King's It, Pet Sematary, The Stand, Anne Rice's Witching Hour, The Firm, and numerous other books. Some from Robin Cook, Clive Barker. So I have a whole lot of influence from that segment of my life that translated. And so, a lot of these authors, I admire their work, and I think they're wonderful artists, especially Anne Rice. I've been in direct contact with Anne Rice on several occasions. She's been a really great inspiration. Now, when I was in college, my first writing job was actually on a newspaper where I was initially a staff writer. I reviewed films, and I reviewed Schindler's List, Pulp Fiction, a lot of the films of that time. They loved my writing, so they promoted me. So I became arts and entertainment editor. I also became copy editor. And I did that throughout the time that I was at college. So I have published work back from the 90s. So it's available somewhere in some database. That's all I know. And I do have old copies of the papers, like somewhere in a closet. And of course, my mom saves them, because she loved all that. But that was actually my first time I saw my writing in some sort of a publication.
Now, being that you started your official writing career as almost a journalist, did you ever consider taking that path further, or was that just something you did that kind of just kickstarted the creative juices?
It was a platform.
Yeah.
I would not go back to it. I am a much more creative individual. Not to say that journalists aren't creative. It's just that it's more like, okay, you're reviewing something, you're reporting on something, you're following the structure of a newspaper or a magazine or news or, something like that. I need that blank palette. I used to take art classes when I was a lot younger. And one of the activities that we did was we took a huge blank piece of paper, and the art instructor would go around and she'd do a scribble on the page. And our assignment in class was to turn that scribble into something. I think I model a lot of my work on it. So, everything has the chance to be something. And a scribble can turn into the Mona Lisa. A word can turn into War Angel, and that's kind of the way I look at it. And I need that blank palette.
Nice.
People have said, oh, you can do ad copy for companies and you can do this and do that and write all the time. It's like, oh, I don't know if I can do that.
Yeah. It's a different way to write.
Sure. Absolutely.
Do you remember anything you wrote from your earliest time writing? And is there something from something that you wrote early on that you loved that you did that you keep on doing now?
I would have to say the first thing I ever remember writing was the most abhorrent, horrible piece of storytelling I did in high school. And it was about these 2 women who were going to overtake a casino. And I was talking about the dice making love to the craps table. And it was, yeah. So it was, high school creative writing class. And anyway, there was that.
Yeah.
So now there was also in college when I was writing a story called A Vampire in London. I knew that I wanted to write something dark, maybe about vampires or immortals or something like that. I didn't know that. I think I was just practicing for Ashes. I had no idea at that point. But, I wrote probably about 80 pages, and it was really, I was researching like the bubonic plague and like writing about all these scenes, all those scenes of like in the 1800s and stuff like that, when all the coffins were being carried out, like wooden coffins to all these, horse-drawn hearses and everything like that in the dirt streets and everything. It was just, a mess back then. And then the computer died and I lost it. And so I lost all of that. And then I kind of fell away from it for a while. And I went into my hospitality career and had a successful time at Widener, and did that for a number of years until 2002. Now, 2002 came, and I said to myself, I really feel like I want to take another crack at that novel. There was something inside me that was kept on bringing me back. I was doing all this stuff in my life, and I kept getting brought back to the writing, to the creativity in the writing. So I know this is what I meant to do. I know that because when I look back, I can see all the other stuff that I've done, and I always seem to come back to this. I sat down and I wrote. I started to write, a story called "The Last Nail in the Coffin," and I created the character Antoine, and that was the story that was to become Ashes. Every journey of a 1,000 miles begins with one step. It's a marathon, not a sprint. All these famous quotes by famous people really apply to life and how everything takes shape over time.
All right, so let's get into your writing a bit. The origin of your art, and who was the first character you created, and how have they shaped everything you've done since, or have they?
Antoine was the first character in Ashes. Antoine, he's really, he was he was a character that really was, he was immortal. He wanted so hard to be good and do good, but he didn't. He struggled, and he was afraid of death and what came after it. That was his biggest thing, is like, how can I correct or make amends for all my transgressions and get myself to a point where I no longer have to fear death. And the Tales of Tartarus, which are those books that begin with Ashes and conclude with War Angel, it's really a journey, and it's a journey, from darkness onwards to light, and it's definitely his journey.
Sounds like he shaped quite a lot of how you write.
Well, yes, a lot of the characters have actually.
Yeah.
The cast of the Tales of Tartarus is representations of, I think, a lot of the celestial realm. So, and not necessarily directly or indirectly. There was a character, Tramos, who, surfaced later in the story. And Darius was Antoine's lover and maker, and he was in the story. I mean, there's a lot of representations of a lot of different things. For example, you have Darius, who, in the quest for immortality, was fighting for his survival. He was an immortal who actually lost his gift, and so he became mortal again, and he was struggling. He was terrified of death because of what he'd done. I wouldn't really go so far as to call him a villain, but he was an anti-hero, at least, because he was just not, he was the one who didn't really care about being bad, until he says, oh my God, I'm going to die. I'm going to die one day. And then it all kind of hit him. And his, in the quest for immortality, his body is catching up with his soul. So he's like rapidly aging, and he's just like, I need to get an elixir. I need to fix this. I need to fix it because I can't die. I can't go to where I'm going to go when I die because it's not going to be a good place. I need to figure out a way to become immortal again. And then there's the Hooded Man from the Blood Decanter. In 2015, one of the reviewers called it one of the most recognized villains of the year, because he had that long red robe, and he in the Blood Decanter, he actually was going to the immortals of the series and enticing them with this decanter full of this sweet hot blood that was supposed to bring them salvation, redemption, and cleansing and a fear of death. And it turned out that it was doing just the opposite, and almost the entire population was nearly wiped out. There's a lot of characters from the Tales of Tartarus series that really have been a big part of my life and my writing career. So a lot of these characters were really, really interesting to write about, and they spoke to me for a very long time. And it's a big part of my life. The Tales of Tartarus, I mean, literally were the foundation to my writing career.
Interesting. So what characteristics do you value in your protagonists and antagonists that you always try to stick to?
A lot of it has to do with why they are the way they are, and in terms of like being physical, a physical description, or I don't focus on things like clothes or this or that. When I was a younger writer, I had a tendency to over describe. I found out that it slows down the pacing, whereas the reader a lot of times wants to formulate their own picture in their mind. You give them like part of the painting or part of the picture, and then they fill it in with their imagination. And that's something I think I learned from Stephen King and from his On Writing book. And in terms of the characters, I like to really look at their background, and their history. Antoine, the character that I mentioned earlier, grew up working in the coffee fields in Sri Lanka, harvesting coffee in the searing hot tropical, summer heat around the Indian Ocean, just outside of Badula. And at a very young age, he witnessed his father being murdered in a shed in the back behind the yard. And a lot of that, I think, shapes his actions further along in the series about, his struggles with Darius, who is his maker, but not his father. He had a lot of things throughout the series that may have stemmed from that event.
The environment, relationships, their background, what do you think really influences the character the most?
It's all of them. I have characters in the Europa Effect. One in particular, her name was Counselor Abigail, and she wakes up in the middle of space on this starship from hypersleep pretty much, and she doesn't know like where she is or who she is or what she's doing. And the way I describe it in that story is I keep it very mysterious, and it's like the reader is going to be just as confused as she is, and that influences what she does throughout the book. And the same thing with the characters in the Tales of Tartarus, even the Mortician. The Mortician is like its own ball of wax on the side, and the way the characters are the way they are. I mean, Ned McCracken is the Mortician in that book, and he struggles, and we learn in the book some of the the horrible things that happened to him in his past that caused him to be the way he was in the story.
Where does a character really take shape for you in your stories? Where do you think it really starts to come together?
I explore character. I think a lot. I'm not the type of writer who can say, oh, I've written thousands and thousands of words in a day. That's just not the way I write. I write very slowly. When I pick a project, I focus on one project. The project that I've been working on now, I've been working on since February. And the characters, what I do, I have a whiteboard that's behind me right now. This sign right here is actually blocking it because it's the notes from my work in progress. But what I do is a lot of times when I'm developing a character and I'm getting close to a character, I think of formative life events and like I was saying before, like why they are the way they are. Why are they doing what they're doing? Because I feel like as a reader, as someone, when I go through and read books, I want to know, what I want to know is why are they behaving like this? Why? And okay, I don't care that their shirt is red. I don't care that they're wearing jeans or sneakers. What I want to know is why are they sitting on the couch with their shoulders down, their head down, and tears are streaming down their cheeks? That's what I want to know. I want to know, why are they crying? What is going on inside their mind? What's the storm? What's going on? Where did that come from? That's what I look for as a reader.
Where does the world building process begin for you? What is the first aspect that you tend to tackle?
Well, stories come to me initially as a title. And I will take that title and I'll gradually flesh it out. My process actually is very archaic. I get a regular notebook, single subject, spiral notebook, and I will take notes, whatever comes to mind. I usually will get out of my writing studio. When I do that, I'll go out and about. I'll sit in a cafe or a restaurant or whatever, just to put myself in a different environment, because my writing studio has so much stuff here from previous projects. I try to separate myself from that. I just go and I say, okay, what type of notes can I do? I've definitely turned into a plotter over the years. I started out as a pantser, and I will create an outline. Now, when I create the outline, I don't always stick to the outline because I don't want to box myself in with it creatively. When I actually sit down to write, I kind of pants my way through it, because I want to say, okay, I have kind of a general idea of what I want to do, what I want to say, what I want to happen. But I know that I want to have that creative freedom that I need as a writer. And so I'm kind of like half and half. So, but what I do is a lot of times, in my more recent novels, I start out with this omniscient narrator. Okay, so I released a video a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago now, comparing novelists to directors of film. An author, a writer, especially an independent author who, puts out their own stories, their own books, in their own vision and their own style, edited with editors that they have chosen, with their own input on the story and everything. That is probably the most similarity to being a director of a film. You've kind of got the storyteller position there. You're in charge of the entire story. And so I kind of think of myself of like, doing this like a director would. You have that wide panoramic view shot, and you're slowly zooming in, slow, and then you get to a character or a scene or something that's going on, and then that's where like the camera kind of moves around and shows, oh, this is what's going on. The Wandering Star is the perfect example, because the Wandering Star starts with that omniscient narrator and saying, oh, well, we've got this whole big huge situation here. Okay, the rotation of the Earth has slowed to a stop, and then we have this big event where we have this massive tidal wave throughout the Earth that has displaced millions of people. We've got this massive supercontinent that spans the globe, and we've got the survivors living underground in these colonies, and they're running out of supplies, they're running out of food. So we have this huge situation, and then it zooms in really quickly on this one colony called Sector B, and those are the characters of the story. And so now, okay, we've zoomed in. Now we see all this, and we have a different perspective. And then we come to the protagonist, Jeremiah, who, we see the story through his eyes, and that is a lot how I write. War Angel's the same way. War Angel, you start in this big, huge open shot. The opening line of War Angel is, "There once was a story of a war angel." Very, very broad. It can go anywhere. And we gradually come in closer and closer and closer, introducing all these different questions and all these different things of like, okay, the reader's going to be like, they're going to read this first section and like, they're going to have 1,000 questions. Then you zoom in really quick and there's Delia. And this formative life experience, which has shaped who she became in the story. And so I follow that. I've been following that in my more recent novels. It's a little bit different. Totally different way I started a novel was The Mortician. The Mortician did not follow that pattern. It started immediately with the experience. Like I knew with that type of book, if I were to start with the big panorama picture, when you're talking about a book like The Mortician, I'll probably lose the reader by the time I zoom in.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to want to say, oh, well, I'm just reading this whole like story on funeral homes and morticians and death, and it's like, oh, I think I'll put this one away.
Yeah, yeah.
That one I had to approach differently, and I started at the zoom in on Jacob when he's at his grandmother's funeral as a 3-year-old little boy, and he reaches into the coffin and touches her cheek. And he says, oh, she's cold. What's going on? I thought she was just asleep. That's where The Mortician starts. Mm-hmm. And so The Mortician had to be approached differently.
Do you follow the principle of 3-act structure then, if you're kind of looking at it as a movie?
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. All my books have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Mm-hmm. And I do write in a pretty much a non-linear fashion. Mm-hmm. I have all my books seem to be that way. I pretty much do follow the 3-act structure.
What element do you think you tackle last in your building process? Okay,
well, like, for example, like in the first draft, it takes me a very, very long time to put together a first draft. I start at the beginning, and then I do the opening sequence, however long it may be. It may be 10 pages, it may be 150. Okay, and then I work on the ending, because I want to know where the story is going to wind up. I need to know where I'm going with this.
Interesting.
And then after that, then I fill in the middle. And the middle, I've heard over the years has been a really challenging part for a lot of authors, myself included. And it's a tough part. And I found that by using that structure, beginning, end, middle, has helped me with that middle. Okay, I have all that stuff from the beginning to draw on, and then I know where I need to go. So now it's a matter of, okay, filling it in with all the different scenes and things like that. Now, when I write the book, I write it out of order, and not just in a nonlinear fashion, but I literally write it out of order. I may write a scene. I say, okay, I know based on my overall outline that I want Delia to do this in, the fourth section of the book. And I said, and I've been thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but I'm working on the second section of the book, and I'm struggling. I'm like, oh man, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to type next. And so I'll go work on that. But what I'll do is I'll go to the very end of the document. I will write, okay, Delia needs to, do this with Darius or whatever. And I'll put that down after the end of the book. I'll write it, underline it, highlight it, write the whole sequence. I'll get it out and I'll paste it in later. And, I'll do that. That happens in a section of a part of my process I call story structure. It's the first part of the editing process before I actually send it out to the editor, where I'm basically turning it into a flowing story. Think of like a puzzle spread out on the floor.
Right.
Each piece of the puzzle represents a scene or a sequence or something that has to be put together. So it's one of the most tedious yet rewarding parts of the process is what I call story structure, where I'm taking every little piece and I'm moving it around to where the story flows, and it's a good flowing story, and everything just, comes into line. And I said, oh, there's a hole there. There's a gap. And I know where I have to write a bridge, to keep the flow going.
I think this question is probably more apropos of your writing and who you are more than most that I would know. I'm real excited to ask you about this, and that's how you would define your dogma in each of your worlds.
Well, the Tales of Tartarus is definitely darkness to light. It's my own personal journey. I mean, I wrote it to be read in any order. And that's the beauty of the series. You can pick up whatever book appeals to you. But if you want to take the journey that Antoine took or that I took, you have to start with Ashes and you have to finish with War Angel, because it'll bring you to a better place. It brought me to a better place. The Vega Chronicles is an interesting exploration of science. It shows a different perspective on things. the Vega Chronicles really explore the whole concept of faith versus science and things like that. They're not Christian books. They're science fiction novels. But when I looked back in them after writing, I was like, oh, that has some interesting stuff. My recent project, the one that I've been working on now, I've been researching a whole lot on the Big Bang. The whole thing about the Big Bang and everything with how the universe was formed and everything, I just find fascinating. And so I'm bringing all that to that series. And I think once readers discover that series, I think they're going to love it.
What about the Mortician? What's the dogma there, you think?
Well, that's something that's really still being formed. Since the Mortician just came out about 10 months ago now, that is a book that is still taking shape. You know, I would have to say one of my goals with the Mortician was to maybe take a little bit of the fear out of death, but I don't know if I was successful with that or not, because Reader's Favorite gave a really interesting analysis of the book, gave it a 5-star review, loved it. And when I was reading Reader's Favorite's review, they were talking about like how I was talking about the most ultimately terrifying thing like in the whole world of one's own death and the mystery and the fear of the afterlife. Like, oh wow, well, maybe I just inserted more fear into it instead of taking fear away. But well, you know, what are you gonna do? It's just the first book of the series, so we'll see how it goes.
In your readers' eyes, what is the scenes that they most want to talk to you about? What are their favorite scenes that you've encountered that they want to talk to you in depth about?
Definitely.
Without spoilers. If there's spoilers.
No, I don't think this one's a spoiler. The opening scene of The Mortician is one that on the Take a Journey book tour that I just, got off of last month, was a big... The Mortician was probably the title that dominated that tour because it was written from a really personal perspective. And a lot of people wanted to know if, Jacob is the main protagonist of the story, but Ned the Mortician is another protagonist of the story. Okay, for example, that story shifts back and forth from 2 different time periods separated by decades. And so you have Jacob, who is a researching student for his master's degree thesis project. And then you have Ned the Mortician, who's a mortician from the 1930s. Okay, now Jacob's project for his master's degree was to explore and uncover the secrets of the Waxley Mortuary, which is sitting in ruins. But this one in particular, a lot of people who I talked to on the tour about this book in particular was asking, is Jacob you? Is Jacob you? And this is what I had to say. I was like, well, I can tell you this. I took a lot of my own life experiences and helped formulate that story. There's a scene in The Mortician where Jacob and his best friend Daryl are in the backyard of his house where he grew up in, burying his pet hamster. Now they're little kids at this. They're like maybe 10 or maybe 12 or something like that. And Jacob is distraught. He's like, this is the first time in his life that he's ever experienced death. And it's this little dead hamster who's orange and white named Macaroni. and he's got him in his little shoebox, and he's getting ready to bury him, and his friend Daryl is helping him dig the grave. And that I had a pet hamster named Macaroni that I remember burying in the backyard, and so I actually used that experience to work it into the story. And it actually turned out to be a really poignant scene between the two boys.
I don't want to ask you what your favorite scenes were to write, because I now looking back at that question I sent you, I kind of look at it as these are all our children, and you don't ever want to pick your favorite. But
Right.
I'm curious, what scenes do you go back to quite often that you find yourself going back to and exploring in your own readership of your own work?
I have a scene that I can't seem to forget. And I don't necessarily go back and rewrite. Well, let me make this answer a two-parter, because I do have one that I go back to that may formulate a novel in the Astrofiles collection.
Please.
But in this particular scene that I wrote in War Angel, I cannot get out of my head. It's one of the most chilling and upsetting scenes I've ever written. And when I wrote it, it was War Angel has themes of protection, of guardianship, because it talks a lot about guardian angels and things like that. And there's a scene where an angel gets torn apart by hellhounds, and it was so intense. I wasn't expecting it. It hit me so hard when I wrote it, with these visuals of these giant wings like reaching up towards the heavens, and they're all like splattered with blood, and you're thinking, God, like that's who's supposed to protect me. And it hit me so hard, I couldn't work on the story for a while. I called my editor. I was like, I don't know what to do. But it made it in the final book, but it's just, the visual is just so intense, and it's just so, I don't know. It's just a scene that, it's in the final book. It made it to the final cut because it was so powerful, and it was so sad. On another note, there is a scene in The Quest for Immortality on how a character died, and she's found in her bathroom, kind of splayed out on the toilet, like she was shot, like either somebody shot her or she committed suicide. That actually will be explored further in the Astrofiles. The whole idea behind the Astrofiles are characters who didn't get a whole lot of page time and a whole lot of exploration in the Tales of Tartarus will be explored in the Astrofiles. There's been a lot of authors who have influenced a lot about what I have done in our network of the independent authors. I'm in contact with a number of independent authors, and we do, watch each other and help each other and assist each other. I've always encouraged writers to post their books to my page, to the A.L. Mengel page. It's approaching 7,000 followers. It's a great, the reach is usually between 60 and 100K just from promotions and things like that. So post your books on my page, bring them to my followers. We can help each other. The only thing is I can't do erotica on there, but definitely a lot of influence. I met Cindy back in March. We had a great time because she was actually on her family vacation down in Orlando, and I came and sat with her, and we were both a little starstruck because she's like, oh my God, I'm meeting El Mengel, and then I'm like, oh my God, I'm meeting C.L. Schneider. And we had our picture taken together, and it was really fun. We talked shop the whole time. Joshua Robertson, I've had a lot of contact with. He's really cool. Jeremy Croston is another one. We were touring together for a while in the beginning of the year. Also, DM Kane. She has really, really been one of the biggest supporters of Right Storm. I have a whole lot to owe with the success of Wrightstorm to DM Kane.
I'd be remiss if I don't talk about Wrightstorm a little bit because I've used it. It's a very useful tool, and I've been a part of some of the sessions, and I'm curious how it all came about for you. What brought you to develop this system, and tell everybody a little bit about it too, because I'm sure a lot of people watching this don't know about it as well.
Well, the system is it's a very basic principle. It's how I write, because, we're getting increasingly busy as authors. And, myself, like I was saying before, I work full time, so I don't have a whole lot of time to write. But, being an author, we all know we have to promote, we have to, do all this stuff. We have to manage our social media, we have to design covers, format, edit, all this other stuff. Then you have all your life stuff. You got to let the dogs out, you got to mow the lawn, you have to vacuum the floor, you have to make dinner. And before you know it, you didn't have any time to write. The whole principle behind Wrightstorm is to set aside an hour, just one single hour of pure focus. And you have to prepare yourself for that hour. You have to, get rid of the distractions, do whatever you have to do. Turn off YouTube, and things like that, and say, okay, I'm opening up my document, put on music if you have to drown all the background noise out, and write for 30 minutes. Just focus for 30 minutes. And then you take a 10-minute break. You can do whatever you need to do in that 10-minute break. You can answer some emails, you can have a beer, you can, do whatever you have to do during that 10 minutes. And then you do it for 30 more minutes. And then you're done. You don't have to say, oh man, I have to sit in front of the computer for 6 hours and try to crank out 2,000 words. Because it's actually been proven time and time again across almost every continent in the world that a single hour of intense focus on your work in progress can get you sometimes 1,000 words or more. And that is the whole idea behind Wrightstorm. There was a book that came out on Wrightstorm in 2015, but I've even told other authors, like, listen, I'm not here to say, oh, buy the book. I'm going to say, adopt the principles, because it works. It works. When I saw authors struggling, I said, try this.
Nice. And it's out there for everybody to go get. So go get it. And if you're a part of the groups that Andy and I are part of, then he'll tell you that when he's going to start a session or two. And I think everybody should try it at least once. It doesn't work for everybody, but it can work to at least get you kickstarted. So
sure, it can. It works with a blank page, or it works with a scene being planned out. And for me, it doesn't work for every title that I work on.
Sure.
The Wandering Star, I wrote almost entirely in Wrightstorm sessions. And then there's other books that I'm like, I have to sit with this book all day. I have to think about it all day. Like my project right now is one of those projects. It's not a Wrightstorm project because the project that I'm doing requires so much research and things like that are just time consuming.
I honestly believe in passing on knowledge. If I have something that I have learned as an author, as a writer, as a book publisher, I'm going to share it. And I met somebody today when I was working on my Colonia. I had my printed manuscript, and she sat down next to me and started talking to me. And it came up that I was a writer, and she saw the manuscript and everything, and we talked about Wrightstorm and everything about getting published and the avenues of going the ways. And she said something very profound to me. She said, you're going to go far because you share your knowledge. And honestly, sharing our knowledge is what it's all about. It's all about that.